got to go. Got it to set. Sure.
I'm recording right now.
That's her grandfather.
What?
That's her grandfather. Oh, he's sitting over there now.
He's a friend.
Did you put money in that I can just go up and get some?
I didn't put any money in it. I wasn't even wanting. But
Okay.
go ahead, you can still get it. No, get you something.
Two times in 1 week.
I know. I borrowed.
I do have somebody coming in, Jan. Kirsten
Meredith's
coming to
gonna
help
sit
with
here.
Pilates
Get
on
another one
Friday.
back.
She's gonna
Okay.
be out. Yeah.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you.
Jeez. Just a little bit.
I have to tell you, I was brave on knock your coffee off. I was brave on the way out. Yeah. But I got such angst about the way back. Because I don't know why. I don't know. Because on the way out I had it all. I mean, it was all even written in my pamphlet. Yeah. How to do that whole thing. So this is how I traveled to get where I needed to go. So I started off car, shuttle, plane, subway, train, bus, taxi. On the way back, I added something. So on the way back, because my aunt died.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, yeah. It was when we were doing that auction.
No, the one that Train goes to Texas and I got a message, I think, on Sunday that hospice said
Sheets and
and then
pillowcases.
Monday.
That's been a little while.
Yeah.
So the funeral was Friday, so I should have, I would have been back in time.
5 hours.
But I looked at it, yeah, it was 11:30 p.m. Kirsten. And then she started. Oh, they are. Yeah, I hear you.
Kirsten is going to talk for about 15 to 25 minutes, somewhere in there, and then we'll have a period of question and answer. And we're hoping to have maybe 5 to 8 minutes at the end where she'll be in the back to sign books or Excel books or answer questions like that too. So we're hoping to stay on a schedule like that. We'll see how we do. Schowalter and her family moved to Rochester from Marshfield, Wisconsin in 2002. They were members of Zumro's congregation until 2012. She graduated from the top of her class from Mayo High School. From there she went on to Northfield and attended St. Olaf College, her father's alma mater. While there she studied many things, traveled frequently, and earned a degree in Spanish. Since then, she's been out in the Pacific Northwest. She worked at a nonprofit, earned her Master's of Arts in Demography from the University of California, Berkeley. You can ask her about what demography is. It's one of those majors that didn't exist when I was in college. I could tell you my understanding is that it's data-driven analysis of population dynamics. I think it goes well beyond that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, she lives in the Pacific Northwest still. She manages her own business, which is entitled Aging Courageously. I think she has her web address up there in the website. Aging Courageously is an organization that supports exquisitely alive human beings in welcoming change with transition coaching. In November 2017, she published her first book, In My Own Skin, a memoir of her journey of living with loss and grief. In its first edition, the book resonated across the spectrum of ages, from middle schoolers to widows in their 90s, because it brings to light the deep love that connects us even after we love. Even after the people we love have died. It's available on Amazon, Kindle, and select bookstores across the country, and in the back of the fireside room. Please welcome back to Zumro, Kirsten Schowalter.
Good morning. For for those of you that knew me here, you may have remembered years of sharing about being in the Nutcracker over at the Civic Theater. So I couldn't deny myself the opportunity for a dramatic entrance over here. I almost wanted to come out just like this, ready to go on stage, but I walked, as you can tell. It is so wonderful to be here this morning with all of you. And, you know, I've thought many ways about how I might begin this conversation this morning. But I actually think the service upstairs did me the best favor I could have asked. And isn't that part of what the message was, right? There's always enough and more, really, than we need. It's all there for us. Because I don't want us getting the wrong idea of what we're here to do this morning. From what you may have seen on the book, in the newspaper, perhaps what you remember about my family's journey and story while we lived here in Rochester. There's stories in there that are sad. There's stories that we could call tragic. And yet, that is part of that story, and that's part of the conversation we're having this morning. But that's not really what we're here to do, right? We're not really here to be in a place where we're thinking about so much scarcity, so much what we have, what has been taken from us. Because really what we learn, the more we experience that process of losing things. And it's not always just about losing people, right? There's so many things we lose. I grew up loving ice cream, dairy, cheese, you name it. And now I'm lactose intolerant. So just that alone, right, was something that as a child was so defining to me. I mean, when we were in Marshfield, we'd go to the Weber farm outside of town and get fresh ice cream cones, and now the thought of that really makes me feel quite sick. And so the fact that those things that we can think are parts of ourselves, these things that we define ourselves with, the people we surround ourselves with, all of that, right, makes up who we are in any given moment. And in all of these different places, we have opportunities to lose. We have opportunities where things will die. There's the death in our everyday as much as there is the death that we see every couple years, or however often it is we see in people, right? So when we see that everywhere, when we let ourselves acknowledge this process of talking about grief, about sadness, about loss, is really just a natural part of what it means to live, all of a sudden the conversation we're having here this morning is not about really death at all. It's about life. Because that's what we're here to do. So that's the first thing I'm going to tell you that is, maybe you could say two sides of one coin. I want a t-shirt someday that says walking paradox, because I think there's so many things in our life that we think is over here and we think it's over there, and yet really we contain both of them within ourselves. But now I'm going to tell you some more things that are like that. When I set out to write this book in my own skin, I was describing the experience that I felt was so strongly kind of painted the entire picture of my high school, late teens, and sort of the last 11 years of my life. And then I learned something in school, which seemed to actually confirm that, right? It seemed to actually confirm that there was this unique and rare experience that I had had, and that I had a story worth telling about. So actually, to Mike's point about demography, I'm gonna use the board here and teach you a little demography. So the three things that demographers like to study are fertility, mortality and migration. I was writing a book about my own experiences with death as I was learning about population mortality. Talk about one end over here and the other end over here, right? It was deeply intimate and also deeply impersonal, right? Numbers, statistics. So one of the things that I learned is that, we're going back to math class here, thank you, Mr. Nelson. We have a graph, and here along our x-axis is something we might know as age. And here along our y-axis is basically the number of people that would be born in a given year. So we could say the number of people in the year 1900, that were born in the year 1900. And if we look at the number of people that are born in the year 1900, there's something that happens. As they get older, this is 100% of people, or like 100, yeah, so we'll do this as proportions, basically. This is all of the people up here. Basically, there's this kind of gradual process, right? The older they get, the more of them die. And it's pretty gradual and pretty constant. If we look at the group of people that were all born in the year 2000, it looks something like this. A whole bunch of them are born. They all live, or almost all of them live, till like 50 or 60, and then, boom, everybody starts dying really fast. And it's not to say that that's how it actually works, right? The way I just described that is like how you would describe the graph, right? But there's all kinds of things that are going on in our lives that make something like that happen, right? There's so many ways in which people are less likely to die when they're younger. We know how to cure childhood illnesses better. We know how to save babies who are born too early. We know how to, we don't have the same kind of epidemics currently that sweep across and take people's lives at early ages, right? So the things that happen that cause someone to die relatively young in their life are the things that happened to me, right? It's the sudden, unexpected, that change everything. And what we know about that from the numbers is to say that fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer people are going to have any kind of experience with death before they are much later in their life. So when I learned this, I thought, oh my God, this explains everything. I thought when I was a 9th grader, I was walking into my high school and no one understood anything. I thought I was the only one there who had any idea about what I was going through. It felt so alone. And I can tell you a chart I learned in school that tells me the same thing, right? But here's the other side of that coin, right? In writing my book and in writing about what I was feeling and in sharing about what I felt, I've learned that I've never been more connected to other human beings. Never. There are so many people, right, that have walked this path before, that have walked the path of understanding loss. And this was like a light bulb in my mind. I was like, how could it, what? There are people that have walked this way before. We are not alone in our experiences of loss and death in our everyday lives. We're not alone at all. It is what brings us together because it is the fact that we are dying that gives this moment, this piece of life that we have here together, meaning, and a meaning that is so like pressing and urgent, right? Like we are here, this breath fills us right now. And that's something that all of us in this room are part of, and all of us in this room know is not going to always be there. We know it's going to end someday. So I thought I was alone, and yet we are so, so, so together in this. It is a unifying experience. So I want to read a little bit from my book about some of these moments. Because I think, it's just the rhythm that is life, right? That keeps us moving forward. I'm making this gesture because I'm trying to find the words to express what it is, right? It's really just like it's this motor that we come to have these moments of loss, and yet we also come to figure out how do we keep living on? How do we live? What does it mean that we live? So I'm going to start with a section that really described what it felt like, that aloneness. Because that was real. It was real that I felt that way. But it's, I think I wanted to share that togetherness piece at the beginning, because I think it's also important to remember that there's that side of it too. So this is from a chapter that's called Impaled. I felt like I'd been impaled. It was as if part of me had been gouged out, not gently chiseled like an artist, but forced out of me. When I looked down, I could see through the hole past my liver and to the back wall. No amount of stitching could close that wound. I could pretend I didn't feel it. I could continue my walk and life denying it ever happened. But denial doesn't take away the effects. It's like physics. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. Those energies inside of me responding to my hurt would not disappear, even if I denied they existed. I might have been able to pass them by for a moment, but they came back to me. More difficult than denial is saying, okay, this hurts a lot, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try to be myself. Some days it worked, and some days it didn't. It's easy to become overwhelmed with the onslaught of feelings that only a moment ago seemed subdued. It was dangerous and risky because it meant I might lose my composure in front of other people. Why would anyone else understand what I was doing, what I was feeling? That was the ultimate sign of defeat for me. Every time I was in a crowded space or speaking to someone who wanted to try and help me be okay, inevitably something would hurt. A tender spot seared in a moment of unawareness. It wasn't anyone's fault, but it hurt. Then there were the days I didn't try to pretend. I walked into school, moved between classes, responding curtly to the how are yous, what's happenings. I lost interest in conversations quickly. I became lonely fast, and bitter too. I had a gaping wound, and yet everything was fine, as long as I gave smiles and let people assume they were real. Meanwhile, I kept hurting. It hurt physically. Emotional experiences have physical impacts on our bodies, and physical injuries are emotional ones too. Eventually, I accepted that I was broken. It's hard stuff. That's a lot of stuff going on inside of the person. Any person. So, to go a little more synopsis-wise for a moment here. That moment came after living 14 years of my life as a big sister of 3 sisters with 2 parents. And after spending family vacation together and coming home not as a family of 6, but a family of 5. There was, as many of you I think will remember, a lot that happened in the time between that. From just stepping out of a crashed car that took my dad's life, to entering a house full of flowers that I didn't really recognize as our own. And there was the funerals and the wake and everything that went along with that in those early days. And then there was the day-to-day pieces. One of the first things I said when I was laying in the hospital after our car crash was, I need to go get my driver's license. I'm only 14 years old, but I have to go get my driver's license because I'm going to have to help driving my sisters to school now. And then we have dance, and then we have this, and then we have that. And I'm going to have to be the driver because there's no other drivers now. It's just mom and blah, blah. I swear that's how fast I was talking. The things that we think about when we're in shock and when we're in this mode of like, how am I ever going to put together what just happened to me, and what just escaped from my life, what has just been taken from me or let out of me, the hole that's been opened inside of me. What am I going to do about that? And those are the things that over time you can't really predict how many of those moments there are going to be of recognizing, oh, shoot, there's another thing I lost that day. I have a section in the book where I talk about doing dishes. And dishes was something that my dad and I used to do together a lot. And then I remember the first time doing dishes in our house again, and all of a sudden realizing I wasn't talking about that really hard algebra problem I had at school, but was instead not saying anything at all because there was no one to talk to anymore. Those moments happen all the time for a really, 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 really long time after someone leaves us, after our lives change dramatically, that loss. But the thing about a hole like that in your life is that after a while, you start to realize that it's not just like things that you're losing that are like running away from you, that you it's coming out of you and you can't catch it and you can't bring it back and you can't grab it. It's like you start to realize that it's not just things that are taken away from you in a moment and in a story like that, but that actually new things can slip in, right? There's like something new that can come inside of you and lodge there without you even realizing it, because you've been so focused on looking at what's running away from you, at what you're losing every day, that you don't even start to realize what's beginning to creep in and take shape inside your own life. And that's the direction that this story takes in the book as well, right? And many of you will recall this part. It's not really a surprise for you, but that's what happened. 5 years after we got home from family vacation on a car crash, we were moving to Yakima, Washington. And we were moving because Mom was going to go to medical school. And I love how she came to that choice, because I think it's an example that we all can really find in our own lives, right? She was wanting to be a doctor from the time she was my age. I mean, it was so funny talking to her at the time, because here I was, high school and college student, And she's talking about how she felt when she was a high school and college student. I mean, it was like, are you in my body or are you in your body? Like, what are we talking about here? But she went back to something that was from that long ago in her life. Mind you, she'd gotten married, had 4 kids, she had a job. She was doing all kinds of things in her life that looked differently, right? But as soon as there was this hole, as soon as our dad was gone and we were a family of 5 and we were trying to come up with what we needed to do next, the things that took root in our lives were guided by watching her let something take root in her life that had been planted a long, long time ago. So we moved to Yakima, and she went to school for 4 years. And in many ways, my sisters talk about how they had to learn how to be parents too when that happened, because I think many of you will also resonate with the experience of the medical school journey. It's not an easy one, with long hours, lots of studying, lots of homework. That was the process we were all there to support. And it also meant Gretchen had to learn to cook, my youngest sister. And it was that choice 5 years later after our car crash that I think is the clearest example in this story of where the rebirth comes after death, where the new comes into our lives and how that spreads. Because I can't even begin to enumerate, mostly for time's sake, the ways that that energy is spread in our lives and the lives that we get to be part of now. Because that one example, especially, I mean, for kids, right? Kids to see that one example of rebirth is to say like, oh my gosh, there is something out there for me that I can actually grab onto here in this loss, besides all the things that we used to do that I am never going to get to do again. And not to mention that, of course, with time, the grieving process changes, right? The grieving process does become just different, I guess. But it's in that opening and letting ourselves be open to the possibilities of what can grow new, that we can continue to find something that roots us to why we are where we are, why we're doing what we're doing, and that gives us a reason to be where we are. And it's not that everything has to happen for a reason, but for us as human beings, we want to know that our lives have a reason. We want to know that we have a purpose, that we're doing something meaningful, that we have something to give. And when we have these experiences, they're inevitable, of losing things, being able to recognize that there's room for opening and new, that brings us new reasons to be somewhere and do something, is, I think, that that's where we grab that meaning back for ourselves. So I'm going to read one more section. Of course, I've talked more than I've read, but one more section that's actually the end of the book that I think gets out that message. It has taken so much to get here, and will take so much to go from here. I don't mean to ever say that any part of all of this feels easy. There are lots of parts that feel really hard. And it will take so much to go from here. But for this moment, now, I can feel glad. There is nothing so satisfying as the feeling I have done everything I could for the moment. Sure, it comes with missing people, not in my presence. Wondering why things happened the way they did. Those questions don't leave us. But the only person I can answer to is myself. And in the lucky moment when I have done that today, I am glad. I am grateful for the call, the courage, the curiosity, the gumption, the experiment, the failures, the successes, and mostly the string of moments that add up to this one. I can and will choose to risk gladness more than anything else because of this moment. I will be grateful and I will be glad. That's what gets to happen to us when we let ourselves be open to loss, when we let ourselves experience those moments of sadness, because that sadness, that loss, that grief is life. It's not like it leaves us when it's there. Something is gone, of course, but our own life, because we are sitting here in these bodies, in this flesh, we are still here with something. And I'm going to tell you right now, right? This book was written after 10 years of since our car accident, and the words that wrote the ending of that book were not the words of the person who started high school 4 weeks after the car crash. So I'm not saying that this is something that we ever, accomplish in any, enduring way. In that sense, the struggle that we feel between all of these different places of aloneness and togetherness, of the dark and of the light in our lives, that struggle is going on forever. I mean, I was actually crying upstairs in the service earlier. But that's why we're here. So thank you. I'm going to end my piece here, and I think we'll open it up for a few minutes of questions.
Kirsten, I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
What have you done with your Spanish?
Bueno, déjame ver.
Sí. And have you done much by way of work with the youth to talk about your book and about life and about loss, which
Yeah. Well, in terms of my Spanish, I was going to answer there in Spanish, but I don't think that really makes sense. It kind of bums me out because I would have loved to. In terms of my Spanish, actually, that was kind of my first jump after college. I was working at a nonprofit called La Casa Hogar, which, if you were to translate that directly, means the home house. And we might think in English that sounds pretty funny. In Mexico, which is where many of the people who started La Casa Hogar came from, that was actually the name of orphanages. That's not what it is now in Yakima, and La Casa Hogar has its own meaning, right? It's just its own sense of home, and it takes place in a house. So you know it by the house that it looks like, but you know it also by the feeling of it. And anyway, so La Casa Hogar is a nonprofit that does education for primarily immigrant families living in the Yakima area who are agriculture industry. And so they have citizenship classes and all kinds of things. English, computer skills. I was an admin, actually, the only one, and got to speak Spanish every day. I was one of 2 white women on the team, and everyone else was Latino. So that was a really wonderful experience. As after that particular work experience and moving forward, the fascinating thing I think about learning another language is just being able to learn how much our own experiences of our lives are are defined by the words we have access to. And in many ways, learning Spanish gave me an entire new vocabulary for expressing my existence that continues to be critical. There are some words I just cannot translate for you, not because I can't tell you what they mean in English if you were to use an English word to say them, but because the word themselves is something that you just can't feel anywhere else. So that continues to be a really important piece for my mind and heart and body. And in terms of working with youth, actually, tomorrow I'm going to be all day at the high school in the English classes, Mayo. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, we're going to be at Mayo tomorrow, all day in English classes. But actually, yeah, working with youth and sort of the youth experience of loss, I think, is part of what many early reactions to my book was this is something that needs to be in every high school library. This is something that needs to be in schools and on colleges. And I certainly think that is true. It takes a lot more to make that happen than I've been able to do with my own two hands. So if there are more hands here that want to help with that, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing with us and sharing emotionally. We really appreciate that. Reflecting back over the past 10 years, what's the most helpful thing any of your friends have done in dealing with the tragedy and moving on with your journey?
Thank you for this question. This is actually one of the questions, the other side of kind of my early feelings about where this book needs to go and where it can take a life of its own, is the question about how do we as communities, right? It's not just about the individual experience of loss, but how do we as communities respond to loss and grief, and how do we support our friends when we see this happen? Because it's different, right? Being a friend versus an intimate family member versus anything else, an acquaintance. I want to give my answer to the question, but also answer your question, which is, so there are a number of things that I would say generally to the piece about how do we as communities respond to loss, which I think is, I remember this story my dad actually told, which maybe there's a little bit of meta levels here or something, but so my dad, who has died, told me this story about going to choir, actually, and hiring someone. I don't remember exactly how this all went down, but all of a sudden there was this conversation about someone who had experienced loss of their son. Their son had died. And she was talking about how she was just still so sad about that, and I know it's been 5 years, but I'm really sad about this. And then walking away, there were whispers around, gee, come on, it's 5 years later. Why is she still so sad? And that, to me, I think is one of the ways that as communities we could do better. Because I think there's the time to show up right away when something happens, right? I did not want to cook. I definitely did not want to do dishes right away after our car crash. And so that sense of just overflowing support that we do have all these traditions around in the early days is really important to carry, I think. We're literally carrying people forward is what we do when we do that. But it's, in some ways, also equally important 5, 10, 27, 55 years later to still be okay to show up to that conversation about someone who's died, because I think we can think that we need to move away from it, when really we just, like I said, it was like the feelings I have are that things are being taken away from me. But in many ways, all of those experiences around that they just keep filling me up and make me who I am, right? They never really go away at all. So there's that piece too that I would say is continuing to show up and being willing to have conversations about people who have died long, long after they're gone. But then if I were also going to give a specific answer of something helpful that someone did, this is one of my favorites, which is that I had some teachers at school after my first quarter that met with my mom to talk about how school was going. And one of the suggestions came out, why don't we give Kirsten an extra set of textbooks so she can have one set at school and one set at home and she doesn't have to carry them every day. And I'm going to tell you that was, I would have told you at the time, why are they helping me? I don't need any help. I'm fine. That's what I would have told you as a 14-year-old. But I'm going to tell you right now that that was so important, because as we're going through putting all these pieces back together, as you're trying to understand why has this happened to me, what is it that I needed to know because of this experience, not having to carry around also heavy textbooks on your shoulders was really, really helpful. So I guess I would challenge you to say, what are the textbooks in someone else's life that you can help out with? Okay, we'll make this our last one here because I want to make sure we have time for smaller.
Kirsten, I don't have a question for you. I think I just have to say, on behalf of a lot of adults in this room, how very proud of you we are. I mean that. Many of us watched you grow up from this little girl to this beautiful young woman with such an insightful mind and perspective on the world. And so I want you to know how very proud of you we are of you. And thank you for what you've done to teach us today and to teach us about loss and grief and how we can all show up in community too. Your words are important. If you haven't read the book, you need to read the book. It's really, really good. And Karen, well done. Welcome home.
I'll just end with, I recently saw Alice Walker. Some of you will maybe know her from her book many years ago, The Color Purple. She continues to be a prolific writer. Has over 35 books or something like that, which is amazing. I just saw her in person though, and she was reading from a new book of poetry, which is called Take the Arrow Out of the Heart, because she was saying how often we can focus our attention on the people that have shot arrows at us, when really what we need to be doing is thinking about what is it that we need to do in order to take the arrows out of our own hearts. Because everyone else is already moving on in their own lives. And anyways, she ended her conversation with something that looked like this, a gesture like this, and she said it was because butterflies inspired her, because as much as they have very small wings, they can do enormous things like change the weather on continents away from us. And so she said that's what she wanted everyone to take away and remember. So I'm going to end by thanking you with the butterfly, because our wings and our movement is important. Yeah.
Thank you for coming.